Shadows on the wall, I can see them fall here and there.
My name is Uli Baer and I'm a professor of comparative literature at New York University in New York. I teach German and French and American literature. It's really fun actually. I like teaching literature. I like teaching my students because I sort of get them started on something that they usually don't know could be taken seriously. They may like books, but they don't really know what they like about books. And I get to read for a living. I mean, I read books and get paid for it, so it's a pretty good job.
Have you ever taught them something about script writing or something like that?
No, but I have a lot of students who are either fiction writers or poets. So a lot of students give me their screenplays or their novels. Most kids want to write screenplays these days, so they give me their screenplays and I'm supposed to comment. And sometimes I comment, not always.
So how do you value a script is good or not?
Basically, I start reading it, and if I read past page 6, it's probably pretty good.
Same for the musical script, right?
Basically, would be the same, yes. I would read a couple pages. If it doesn't grab me right away, I won't read it. If it's on stage, it's something else. I mean, if you see it on stage, then I'll give it maybe 10 minutes.
All right. How do you see the important factor to make a successful script for musical?
I think there are probably two things. You need to have a musical where the character development and the plot is linked to the central songs. So the songs have to not just convey that they're beautiful and they sound good and you want to listen to them, but the plot has to be driven forward in the song. So I think a good musical, you need the songs to move the plot forward. Weak musicals, they have some plot and a song and more plot and more song, and they're not connected. So I think the strength of a musical really depends on that the music drives the musical forward, rather than the musical being a theater play with some songs in it.
What do you see the difference between the script for play and for musical?
The theater play sort of, people keep on talking and people keep on sort of exposing their psychology or motivation or whatever their actions throughout, but musicals need to actually stop and then people start singing, and I think it has to look somewhat organic or natural that they suddenly break into song. And that's harder to do because in the theater you're always on the same level, but in the musical there's a difference between speaking and the songs themselves. So I think it's a harder thing to write.
What's your favorite musical?
I probably don't have one favorite musical, but I think the musicals I like to see are stories about somebody, one person, an individual who's struggling to reach a goal. And I think that's a really important part of musical culture. There's Fame or Chorus Line or Dreamgirls, and there are all these stories about someone who's trying to make it, and or 42nd Street, someone trying to become famous, having to overcome all these obstacles. And I think I connect most to those stories of an individual sort of fighting to find their own voice, basically. Maybe the thing I saw most recently, because I saw Dreamgirls recently, it's the scene where one of the women who is in the band, who's really the strongest singer, but she's a little too strong to be a part of this group. She gets kicked off, and when they tell her that she's no longer part of it, and her kind of suffering that she is no longer part of this group or this team or this effort, and the kind of song she sings to express her sorrow that she can't be part of something. And everybody understands it, but still everybody wants to succeed, and so they have to kick her out.
So please, professional professor in famous university, the story has to be suffering, right?
Yes, the story has to be suffering, and then maybe because musical is an American genre, there has to be a happy ending, I think, at least for one person.
Do you remember any musical that actually has a suffering story?
A suffering story? Probably Madame Butterfly has a suffering story, I think. The Lion King, which I actually like a lot as a musical, which I think is a really incredibly beautiful musical, has a lot of suffering in it, because, you know, the little lion loses his father and it's very sad. I probably would write about somebody who has some kind of goal, someone who comes from the provinces, very traditional, conventional story, someone who comes from a small town, and ultimately that is probably a woman's role, her resistance. Her problem is that she wants to please her parents and her culture, but she can't because she's driven to be someone bigger or something like that. A storyline like this, and then you have to sketch it against some kind of background. So maybe I'll put it in the middle of some kind of very challenging historical context and sort of say how the historical forces are also working against her. So she becomes a kind of symbol of this culture's sort of struggle to become free or something like that.
Then again, it has to be suffering.
It has to be suffering, absolutely. And of course, the most important part, she has to fall in love. That's clearly the most important aspect of every musical. It has to be initially unhappy, but ultimately she has to get the man she wants.
If you also can, like somehow to write a script for a Chinese musical,
Yes.
and then you sort of have some connection with this international world, what would be the story you would like to write about?
You may want to put, I think what would be maybe interesting to put something like the story I just described and put behind it this girl's or this
So it's a Chinese girl.
The Chinese girls. This Chinese girl's put behind it her mother's or her aunt's kind of aspiration. Someone who really didn't have the opportunities at all, who was, 30 years ago, couldn't get the schooling, didn't have the opportunities, couldn't move around this way, and really didn't have any possibility to be in touch with Western culture. And maybe in a very poignant, important moment, the girl will discover that her mother really loved, let's say, one aspect of Western culture, but was not allowed to really learn about it. So the girl can learn something her mother wasn't allowed to learn. So ultimately, I think her mother will side with the girl against the father's wishes to allow this girl to become a big star, sort of also, and to embrace both China and the West.
Would you ever be interested in like writing lyrics for songs as well?
Yeah, I think so. Although I think it's that's a really difficult art to write songs, because I think you have to tell the same story in basically 5 lines, and you have to make it very, very quick. So I think it's even harder because you have less space to develop that. I would love to write a song. I think those people are true artists who can write songs that people remember and tell one whole story in one little song. I think that's really true art. I think China could have a kind of style that would, because there's this incredible depth of talent, of sort of large shows and productions. I think there could be a way in which to incorporate some classic Chinese opera and sort of the kind of the classic set pieces. You have a much longer tradition to draw from. America has no history really to speak of, very short history. So I think China to bring in another story, for example, that mirrors the contemporary story in the old times would be really productive. I think so to always refer back to Chinese history and say that there's an example of that. I also think for people to rediscover Chinese history and Chinese culture after there was a period when it wasn't so easily available, I think that would be really a big theme in a musical today. I think one of the strengths of China is that it absorbs images from other cultures very fast, but it kind of makes them their own. I think right now Chinese culture is kind of holding on to itself. It doesn't give over to these images. So I think a Chinese musical could incorporate all of these images, could even refer to other Western musicals, but make them very Chinese. So I think you could easily borrow from other cultures, but don't feel like Chinese culture is overwhelmed. And I think one of the strengths I'm from New York City. I think the kids in Shanghai look so much cooler than anybody in New York. There's no comparison at all. So I think to get this kind of moment in Chinese culture where China is really ahead of the world in terms of trendiness, I think that's a really important moment to capture. So I think it should be put on stage, and I think they should really capitalize on it. I think they have a really strong sensibility of what images work, what kind of design would work, what kind of styles would work, and they appropriate without feeling indebted to things anymore. So I think that's really where China is really strong right now, and I think it'll be actually quite different from what Japan did for the last 20 years, which kind of wanted to become American and basically modeled itself on American culture. I think China won't have that problem, that it'll look like it's a copy of America. I think China is inventing its own image right now. I think it has to be a story of success. I think it's very much a story about material success right now, but I think inside the story has to be something which is about a life that's fulfilled. And I think Chinese youth are brought up by families which hold on to traditional values, and I think they want to keep those values but don't quite know how to do it, because I think this is it's a very difficult environment now. Everybody has to work a lot. So I think put something in where you keep those values in there. So it's not just a kind of story about success in the real world, but a success that returns you into feeling at home in your family, in your community. Broadway China Network. I think you're doing a great thing. I think it's great to bring musicals to China, and I wish you the best of luck, and I really hope you reach a lot of people in China everywhere.